I'll say it again, being anti-racist is good. It's principled. I'm anti-racist. But what we've in fact seen from many of the left is not anti-racism, but a new racism. It's aimed at whites. It's like they're really cheering for a clash of races sometimes, and that is playing with deadly fire. Now, of course, there are white racists. Tragically, they include this nutter who on Saturday walked into a supermarket in New York State in a predominantly black area and murdered 10 people. President Joe Biden emphasised the undoubted racism of the killer. And in London, writing the day before this massacre, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, wrote that the West's battle against the far right, he means the white right, is going to define this century. And it's easy, if you do look only at the sins of members of one race, to decide they are indeed the worst of the worst, and that the battle with them will define the century. But it's not like that, is it? It's not that simple. Life really is. In fact, 2 of the most recent terrible racist attacks in the United States were by blacks against whites. Darrell Brooks, a black racist, drove his car flat out through a parade of mostly white people in Minnesota, killing 6 of them after posting, "So when we start back knocking white people out, the old white people too, knock them," I won't say what he meant by TF, "knock them out." And last month, this racist posted vile abuse of many races and then went into a Brooklyn subway and let off a smoke bomb and shot 10 people. Now, I am absolutely not saying that one racism excuses the other or one massacre excuses a retaliation. What I am saying is that it's exactly how racists do think. And the people pushing racial division and grudges, white against black and black against white, risk inciting the most horrible tit-for-tat evil, with each side claiming to be the real victims here. Joining me is Brendan O'Neill, political editor of the online magazine Spiked. Brendan, your Lord Mayor in London says the West's battle against the far right will define this century. Is he right?
I don't think so. And the thing that worries me about when Sadiq Khan and others say things like that is that they have such a flexible definition of what it means to be far right. And lots of the time, they're just talking about people who vote for UKIP or other parties on the right, or they're talking about populists, or they're talking about the whole idea of Brexit. These are the kinds of things that they fold into the banner of far right. So I'm worried that they're actually going to declare war on perfectly legitimate points of view, not just things that we all agree are terrible, the people on the extreme fringes of hard right politics. But the thing I think we should be tackling right now is identity politics, because identity politics, and this massacre in Buffalo, New York, is another example of it, has unleashed a new round of racial paranoia. It really ratchets up the politics of victimhood, racial animus, division, tension. We're supposed to judge everyone now by their skin color, by what they look like. And I really think these kinds of horrific, violent attacks are an expression of that racial paranoia unleashed by this new politics. And that's what we need to start talking about.
It really frightens me, Brendan, because you do get people thinking, oh, you know, they're forced to identify with their race, which most sane people wouldn't do from one day to the next, and then start treating every slight against their race as a slight against them personally and thinking they've got to fight back. And I wonder where all this leads. I mean, it just frightens me, Brendan. Now, I see actually China's dictatorship putting a lot of hope in this, in the West tearing itself apart by race. It's like it's gleeful about it. Its state-owned Global Times said, for instance, of this New York, this massacre in Buffalo you mentioned, white terror deepens racial woes. And this has been the theme of Chinese propaganda as I've been following it for a couple of years now, you know, that America's tearing itself apart by race. What does China's glee at this tell you?
I think it's incredibly revealing. China, and probably Russia too, they welcome, I think, the racial tensions and the identity tensions that are sweeping the West, because they see it, not wrongly, as a sign that the West is very divided at the moment, doesn't really know what it stands for, has abandoned its old principles of universalism and reason, and instead is going down the rabbit hole of identitarian tension, division, argumentation, and physical conflict. Not only these mass shootings in the US, but also a spate of violent Islamist attacks in Europe, which have killed around 500 people over the past few years. All of these, I think China and other states will be looking at these as an expression of the weakness and the disarray of Western society. And they're right to see that. They see it as a point of weakness that they can exploit. And I think that's another reason why we really need to get our house in order, push aside this divisive politics, and really rediscover what we have in common in Western societies.
Well, don't look to Australia to lead that. The next Labor government's going to have an ambassador for the First Nations as well as ambassador for the rest of Sorry Australia.